today we're thrilled to myself, Oscar, introduce you, Jeevan, the Director of Security Engineering at Rippling. He has over 20 years of experience in engineering and security leadership, including a prior role at Twilio. Jeevan has been instrumental in embedding security into every layer of software development and cultivating a security-first culture. And with that intro in mind, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Oscar. Today we're going to be talking about security tooling and my thoughts on security tooling itself. Being an individual, I really care about getting my money's worth. So let's share those ideas. So before I typically do that, I always like to start my sessions off with a relevant quote. The great Michael Scott said, "You miss 100% of the vulnerabilities you don't scan and fix." As you know, Michael Scott was a gifted security engineer, and we should follow his advice. Okay, just a few items on the agenda today. We're going to be talking about what are my goals for security tooling, what is the purpose of having them in my ecosystem. We're going to talk about why our approach is wrong. What are we doing wrong as a security community and industry? And we'll go cover the foundational security tools. This is AppSec Conference. I want to cover 4 tools that I need for in my ecosystem. We'll cover a few real problems and some solutions to those problems. So Oscar already introduced me, but I'm Jeevan Singh. I run the product security org at Rippling. I co-lead the Vancouver OWASP chapter. OWASP Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle, and Portland, we team together to have a mini regional conference, AppSec Day Pacific Northwest. So definitely come out for that. And my passion is building security culture and training developers. I get very excited when I meet a developer a year or 2 years afterwards. They join a new organization and they talk about how insecure it is and what they're doing to help secure that organization. So I get very happy whenever I hear that. Okay, so we're just going to cover what are my goals when I bring in security tools. And they're pretty simple. Ultimately, we want to fix vulns. We want to make sure that we're building security culture within the engineering org. We want to discover the gaps through those security tools. And I also like building security incident capabilities within an organization. So let's dive deeper into what that all means. So when I talk about fixing vulnerabilities, I like to combine it with building culture because I feel that they go hand in hand. There's a lot of things that are common with those. Ultimately, as security engineers, we're hired to sort of reduce the attack surface. That's literally the most important thing that we can do within an organization. And there's no point adding more and more vulnerabilities to your vulnerability management program if the current vulnerabilities are not being fixed or addressed. So if you're running into problems with getting vulnerabilities fixed, work closely with their engineering leadership team. Make sure they are aware of how good or poorly their org is doing when it comes to security vulnerabilities. And you want to make sure that you align the entire organization and the security team's goals. Everyone should be aware of how important security work is. So while you help fix that culture, you want to make sure it's top down. You'll start noticing that the engineering team will start to fix vulnerabilities. And when that happens, you want to make sure that you look at the find versus fix rate and make sure that there are more vulnerabilities being fixed rather than found. So at the beginning, don't worry about the sum of vulnerabilities. Maybe you just want to do a little sliver. You might only care about the find versus fix ratio for criticals. Once that's in a good place, then criticals and high, you want to make sure that there be more fixed than found. And once that's in a good place, maybe you introduce another tool. So rather than introducing all tools initially, slowly introduce your tools when the engineering team is building up their muscle. Discovering security gaps. So it's really important whenever I come into an organization, the first thing that I do is look at the security tooling data. And I look at all the data that's available to me, and I use that to understand what is going on in the organization. Who's actually fixing vulnerabilities and who isn't? What tools are fully integrated, what isn't? What type of vulnerabilities are there in the ecosystem? So I use this data to help me create my mental map, my roadmap, and look at ways to resolve classes of vulnerabilities at a time. I don't want to play whack-a-mole, and I want to really make it a big push to fix full classes of vulnerabilities. And if I don't have enough data, that's another thing for my roadmap. That means I need to get that data, which means I need to fully integrate those certain security tools in the ecosystem. So having not enough data also means that you're updating your roadmap itself. So last item that we want to talk about is building the security incident muscle itself. So as security engineers, we know that breaches will happen. It's important that we are prepared. So have a threshold and determine which vulnerabilities are discovered by tooling, and of those vulnerabilities, which one have to go through an incident workflow. It doesn't have to be all of your critical vulnerabilities. We all know our tools spit out a lot of critical vulns. It could be a subset of those vulnerabilities. And so you want to make sure that your security engineers know how to run an incident, make sure that those runbooks are in place. And you shouldn't have to think about it when you're actually during an incident. So you should be just fixing or running the incident itself. And your goal is to walk the engineering team through the security incident. And while they're running through the security incident, fixing the appropriate issue, you should be paying attention to understand what's working and what's not working. And you'll use that to update your runbooks. You want to make those mistakes during the security tooling incidents so that you can build a well-oiled machine. When a real issue occurs, things should be working like clockwork. So again, those are the 4 things that I need to build as part of my security tooling program. Those are my goals. So how is our tooling approach wrong right now? So this is my first spicy take. Security engineering teams are a big part of the security tooling problem itself. And for a number of reasons, we're not selecting the right tools. We're not operationalizing our tools itself. Maintenance costs are way too high. Vulnerabilities are not being fixed, and we're not involving engineering as part of the security tooling process, the vendor selection process. So let's walk through these ones themselves. So not selecting the right tools. And I'll be the first to admit, I made mistakes in my past and selected the wrong tool as well. So ultimately, you want to understand what is the motivation behind the tool itself. Don't buy a tool just for the sake of buying a tool. If you need to buy a SAST, understand why you are buying a SAST. What benefits are you looking for? And this will make it easier for you to create the right rubric and select the right tool for your organizations. Don't worry about the security tooling brand. Focus on selecting tools with the right capabilities. Focus on building that right rubric, and then assess a number of tools for that rubric. The goal is to make the right long-term decisions and not to optimize for the short term. It's really easy to buy a tool because everyone's buying that tool. Much harder to look at your rubric and select the right tool and make sure that you built it in a way that it works for the next 3 to 5 years. I talked a little bit about optimization of tools and maintenance. I'm going to combine those together. You want to make sure that your security tools are set up so that you're not worrying about the KTLO, the operational workload, all of the time. There should be automations and infrastructure that you have in place to make things a lot easier. One of my pet peeves is that tools are semi-integrated into the ecosystem. You might integrate it into just a handful of repos, important repos, but just a handful. The goal should be actually having coverage metrics and rolling it out to 100% of the repos themselves. You might not get to 100% right away, but that's your goal. You always want to strive for that. You also need to centralize your security tooling data so that you can do analysis on it. We talked a little bit earlier about me needing to create my roadmap. This is how I create my roadmap. I centralize the data, I look at it, dive deeper into it. I have to understand the data to drive the right outcomes. And you don't want to manually create tickets. So you need tools, or you need to build the infrastructure, or you need tools that will auto-create tickets. But more importantly, auto-close them as well. I've seen a lot of tools that are very good at creating them that do a horrible job at closing those tickets. Again, you don't want to be involved with that. You want to reduce that operational cost yourself. And we always talk about the total cost of ownership. You have to understand what it is. It's just not the price. Like open source is free, but that's not the total cost of the tool. You're going to be putting in a lot of infrastructure, a lot of automations in place to get that going in a good place. That's same with the vendor tools. As you POC vendor tools, understand how much infrastructure you have to build, how much automation that you have to build to reduce your maintenance costs of it. So make sure that's part of your rubric itself. Oh yeah, another pet peeve of mine is vulnerabilities not being fixed. So if you are paying for tools, make sure that there's no point knowing all the vulnerabilities in the ecosystem. You want to make sure that you are actually fixing vulnerabilities. So some thoughts here is don't push all the vulnerabilities into your vulnerability management program. I've been at organizations where we have literally millions of vulnerabilities in our tools. Some security engineers thought it was a good idea to push all of those into Jira. It's not a good idea. The ultimate goal is having engineering fix vulnerabilities, and you do that by not overwhelming them. You want to trickle those vulnerabilities in. You want to make sure that the most severe vulnerabilities are in initially, and it makes it easy for the org to actually want to fix those particular items. And if they're not, that's okay too. If you trickle them in and half of your critical vulnerabilities get fixed and half of them aren't, that's when you get to apply pressure to your leadership team. So you make sure that you talk to the SVPs of engineering, VPs of engineering, directors, whoever you need to get those critical vulnerabilities fixed. This is how you change the culture. Last one, and again, this I'm very guilty of this in my career, earlier in my career. Make sure that engineering is involved with the vendor selection itself. So these tools are going to be impacting engineering. You need to make sure that they are a stakeholder as part of the process. I also give them a veto. There are some times where they can veto a tool saying this is not going to work for us. And that's happened to me where we went through SEA evaluation. We had 3 tools. The tool that we liked the most, engineering vetoed it for a bunch of different reasons. And so they gain more trust with you if you also agree with their assessment. So you want to make sure that the tool has a great developer experience. You want to make sure that they are stakeholders as part of the process. And the more that they are part of the process, the more likely that they're going to advocate for that tool as well. Okay, we're going to be covering the 4 foundational security tools. Typically, I have 5, but we're talking about tools specifically. So bug bounty is my 5th one, but we'll talk about the 4 that I have in itself. So first thought, another spicy take. More tools doesn't mean you're more secure. So I've been at companies where they integrated a lot of different security tools in their ecosystem. Not a big deal. Impact only comes when the vulnerabilities are being addressed, when you have processes to address those vulnerabilities. That's when it's really, really important. So again, don't optimize for finding more vulnerabilities. Optimize for the organization fixing more vulnerabilities. Culture is way better than metrics 100% of the time. So it doesn't matter how many vulnerabilities you show in your dashboards. Okay, let's talk about the tools themselves. First one up is SAST. I love SAST. It's great for reducing specific vulnerabilities early on in your process. I'm talking about PRs themselves. You can comment on the PRs. You can have really comprehensive coverage within your ecosystem. Great tool to build that security muscle for engineering. When I keep talking about security muscle, I'm talking about culture. It's a great culture builder. They're looking at those PR comments. You can block on them once you're confident with it, but it's great for that. And great for finding vulnerabilities across your organization itself. So typically, SAST is the last foundational tool that I roll out. It has a heavy operational cost. So I like to do it last. I would like to do other tools that have lower operational costs first. Here's a rubric that I use for security tooling. You'll see this criteria. I use Moscow and comments about what Moscow is. Must have, should have, could have. So things that are must have, low false positive rate, again, operational heavy. I want to make sure that the amount of time it takes from my security engineers is limited. So low false positive rate helps with that. I wanted to languages, has to cover all the languages that are in my ecosystem. Costs, while going through some tough times in the tech industry, I want to make sure that costs are always down for that. I have a couple other items that we'll bring up. Leftiness. We all talk about pushing left. Ideally, it's integrated into your GitHub so that it can comment on PRs. I don't want to be integrated in the CI/CD just because that's way too late. I don't want the context switching. I want it to be done earlier. And custom rules, like and even more importantly, if you can get engineers to write custom rules, either security rules or engineering rules, it just means that it is a lot more sticky. It won't be just a security tool, it'll be an engineering tool as well. Okay, this one's not spicy. I know that a lot of people are not big fans of DAST. I'm not either. I find that it is my least important foundational tool, and I could be wrong. I haven't found great value of it. A lot of the times, it's really hard to get it to work out of the box. I typically use DAST for a compliance checkbox itself, and I rely heavily on my bug bounty for those DAST-like findings. My expectation is DAST should be able to find some very easy findings themselves. So again, not a big fan of DAST in itself. And if I'm wrong, please DM me, send me names of DAST tooling that you really like. So for me, I want to make sure it has low false positive rate and it has to be cheap because typically it doesn't provide much value. Okay, security tooling, next one, SCA. This is typically the first foundational tool that I roll out because I find it provides a lot of value for a low amount of cost. Great tool for building security muscle in itself. People understand, developers understand how important it is to patch libraries because they have critical vulnerabilities. So not only that, there have been a number of times where customers would reach out and say, hey, I'm worried about this particular vulnerability. Do you have it in your ecosystem? What's the status of it? So having an SCA tool where you centralize the data, it's very easy to quickly query just to see if you actually have that. And again, great findings with a low operational cost. One thing to note, only use SCA tools that have reachability analysis done. I won't ever purchase one without it. So as previous POC, one of the vendors showed that 3% of the SCA vulnerabilities were reachable in my ecosystem. So that would mean that if I chose a tool without reachability, 97% of the time I'm making engineering do busy work. And I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that we're fixing vulnerabilities that are exploitable. And if there are other critical non-reachable, I may get them to fix that as well. But I want them to fix things that are actually reachable. Rubric for it, talked about low false positive and reachability. Obviously, it has to have the right language coverage. Costs should be low and integration into GitHub. I don't want to build infrastructure to support scanning these repos themselves. Okay, last tool, secret scanning. So big fan of secret scanning. I leveraged a certain vendor in multiple different organizations. A lot of these tools, they can find secrets in not just your code, in Slack, in Jira, Confluence, all that sort of stuff. I love it for preparing engineering muscle for incidents. Incidents are going to happen. It's a great way. Everyone understands how sensitive secrets are. So building up that muscle for incidents is fantastic. It also helps with rotating secrets and getting people used to that. And it reduces overall security technical debt. So again, one of the first tools that I roll out, very important to make sure that it helps lower the blast radius when an incident happens. This happened to me in the past where I was a part of a security incident. And we were terrified because during the incident, we found out there were a number of leaked secrets in Confluence. So we were able to scan quickly, get those, and remediate that issue. Okay, and here's my rubric. The tools that I have, they have to be able to validate the secret. Let me know if it's live or not. I don't want to figure it out myself. The tool has to do that. We talk a lot about low false positive, but low false negatives as well. It has to be able to catch a bunch of different secrets that are being leaked. I don't want to miss those. Ideally, the secret tool isn't storing any secrets in their ecosystem, because if they get breached, then we get breached. And then ideally API support, so I can pull the data in itself. All right. Let's go over here some real problems that I ran into and some of the solutions for that as well. So SCA, we talk a lot about fully get full coverage for tools. Was that organization? It was SCA tool was poorly integrated into the ecosystem. It didn't have 100% coverage. And we spent a quarter pushing to 100%. It was a large organization, probably had 60 to 80,000 GitHub repos. Once we fully covered with SCA at that organization, we centralized the data, we did analysis on the data, and we noticed that there were about 500 Log4Shell vulnerabilities in the ecosystem. And not a big deal because we had additional controls to prevent Log4Shell. But it's troublesome. Why do we have so many? So we remediated vast majority of the vulnerabilities within a month. Fortunately, a lot of those repos we just needed to archive. The rest were done in a couple of months. So again, really, really important to make sure that you fully integrate the tools that you have and get good visibility into it. This was a good story overall. Another time we purchased the wrong SaaS tool. So the SaaS tool was purchased before I joined, but it was the right decision for the tool, for the company at the right time. So it covered all the main languages. It was really cheap. The vendor was more, worked really closely with the team there. But we had so many problems with it. It literally cost me about a third of an employee time, full-time employee, their time to just maintain it, to keep it running. So we hosted the tool internally in our ecosystem, constant uptime issues. Anytime there was a patch, the patch would break, and then we would have to work closely with the vendor to fix that. So we have to patch the patch. And the vendor, the licensing agreement was on the number of users of their tool. So they had all the data in the tool itself, which wasn't optimal. We wanted the SaaS to run in GitHub, but it ran in our CI/CD. So that was way too long, didn't provide good development experience, DevX. So we ultimately had to pull that particular tool. Operational costs were too high, not enough good DevX. Oh yeah, vendors not being good partners. That's always been a challenge for me as well. So at one company, this was a pretty big deal. During the procurement process, the vendor didn't listen to our needs and our requirements. And their goal was to actually sell us. They want to sell the tool. Conversation, they knew after the first conversation, I wouldn't have the authority to sign off on the deal. It was a very large figure in itself. And we would need a VP sign off. So after every time we talked to them, the questions were around, when are you going to involve the VP? When can we start talking to them? When can you make the introduction to that? And I kept on reminding them they have to sell me first. I have to be happy with the tool, with the assessment of the tool. And unfortunately, we didn't even get to actually assessing the tool because the conversations kept on becoming around sell, sell, sell. So if you don't care about me in the procurement process, where you're supposed to be on my side and make me happy, you're not going to care about me when I really need you, when we procure the tool. So I'm not looking for vendors. I'm looking for partners. I ended the relationship. It got escalated to the SVP of sales. I told them that I'm not interested. You had more than enough opportunities to make me happy. You didn't make me happy. I'm moving on itself. All right, last take. Vendors are playing 4D chess and you're playing Hungry Hungry Hippos. Yeah, I don't know if many of you play Hungry Hungry Hippos. It's a game that I played when I was a kid a long time ago. So vendors are hard to deal with. They're very, very smart in itself. So here's some tips for vendors themselves. First, never tell a vendor what your budget looked like. You have to keep them guessing. Don't tell them it's $100 or $20,000 or $800,000. Doesn't matter. You do not talk numbers at all, and make sure that they are aware that only the procurement team will talk about dollars themselves. Also, make sure that the vendor knows that you're POCing with a lot of other vendors, not just them. Probably at minimum, you should be POCing with 3 vendors anyways, but tell them that you're POCing with a lot of them. You don't even have to name names. Just tell them that you're POCing with another bunch of folks. Also tell them that the other POCs are fantastic. They're going amazingly. It's going to take a lot for you to secure their tool. And then once you sort of figure out with your rubric which is the best tool, obviously have conversations with your procurement team and let them know. Don't be in those conversations with the vendor. I've been in those and it's really cringe. These procurement teams are really good at what they do, and it's very uncomfortable being in those meetings. So let them do what they need to do. So in the back end, I'll let the procurement team know what's my favorite tool. If my favorite tool is the only tool that I will procure, I'll let them know that as well. Again, they'll do the magic to get the lowest price possible. But if they're number 1 and a number 2 that are fairly comparable, work with them to come up with the right decision for the organization. All right, let's summarize. There are 5 takeaways that I want you to take away from this conversation. Focus on encouraging a culture of fixing vulnerabilities. The value that you bring is to reduce that attack surface. You have to make sure that the organization is fixing vulnerabilities. It doesn't matter how many vulnerabilities your security tool finds. It only matters how many are being fixed. Work towards full coverage of the security tool. You're going to discover many different classes of vulnerabilities when you do that, and then focus on remediating those classes of vulnerabilities. Prioritize the developer's experience. The easier and better the experience developers have, the stickier the tool and more vulnerabilities that will be fixed. Centralize your security tooling data and understand the theme of vulnerabilities. Again, don't play whack-a-mole. The goal is to actually fix classes of vulnerabilities in the ecosystem that has much larger impact, and automate wherever possible to reduce the operational workload. You want these tools to be in your ecosystem for some time. Make it so that you don't have to focus a lot of attention on them, so they can stand up on their own. All right, just one more link. I talked a lot about this on my blog. Have a look at that. Here's my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I know that we're just about at time, so I will answer as much as I can online. Read the blog. If you have any questions, again, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. All right, and that is it.